Anderson, Senior Editor at GreenBiz, and today I am joined by this lovely woman. Introduce yourself.
I'm Leah Garden, and I'm the Climate Tech Reporter at GreenBiz. It is so lovely to be here today.
Yes, so we're going to learn a little bit more about you in the next couple of minutes, but I just wanted to explain a little bit about how Verge is going to work on the virtual live stream. So 30 minutes before the keynotes happen, me and a co-host, today it's Leah, tomorrow it will be John Schmea, and the next day it will be Sarah Golden, rotating list of co-hosts, but we will be here interviewing people, getting to know what they are doing in the climate tech space. Also, we're expecting more than 4,000 people, or around 4,000 people here in person, plus you all in the virtual world. And yeah, we're really excited to engage with all these folks in climate tech in different parts of the world. All right. So now, Leah, you are our climate tech reporter. You have been at GreenBiz for a few months at this point.
Oh my gosh, 6. Yes, crazy.
Yes, how are things going? How are you feeling? What are you paying attention to in the space?
I mean, climate tech in general has been an incredible space to watch, with a lot of economic turmoil happening just within the country itself. Climate tech has been so stable when it comes to funding, growth, market accessibility. It has been honestly very comforting to watch as somebody who works within the climate tech space, to not have to report on just dour numbers and sad trends. So it has been So fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything you're looking forward to in like 15 seconds?
15 seconds. Okay, I'm looking forward to the Accelerate Pitch competition. We're going to have so many pitches within our starting sectors here, which is food, transport, carbon, energy. I know I'm missing a few. And then we're going to have a big final pitch competition for all of these new businesses in front of the live audience, and it is going to be so fun to watch.
All right, we'll be back in about 90 seconds. Here's the sponsor.
Climate solutions provider and certified B Corp for over 20 years. Our suite of clean energy and decarbonization solutions has helped organizations achieve their climate goals and address emissions in the fight against climate change.
Energy fuels life. From the lights that keep communities going in the dark to the equipment that powers industry every day. At AES, we're leading the change in how the world is powered, ensuring that it happens safely and responsibly for people and our planet, leading the world's transition to renewables and accelerating the future of energy together.
If you're in any industry and you're not thinking about climate change, I don't know what you're thinking about.
Our mission is to be net zero by 2040.
We found partners to put that plan in motion, and that's what we're doing today.
It's time for companies to do their part. No one else is going to magically make this happen. It's on us.
All right, we are back with our first interview of the day. We are here with Jeanette Erikvist, who is the VP and head of Ericsson Canada. Welcome to Sidebar.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Leah. Great to be here.
Yes. So first, we just want to kind of get the groundwork laid. What does climate change mean to you?
So I think climate change is something that we just recognize now. It's for real. We have the science backing this up, that this is happening, and we see the facts, so we see that we need to act on it. So from an Ericsson perspective, being a global leader in the telecom industry, and when it comes to building wireless networks globally, we see that we need to lead this, and not just on our own, but in collaboration with other partners across the industries, because that's really where we see we can make the effects. For myself personally, I am honored to be the head of the sponsor of the Ericsson North American Sustainability Council. So we get to support and help our employees in what they can do for sustainability internally and with customers. And on top of that, I have 3 children that I'm of course thinking of what's coming for their generation and coming generation, and how can we make a difference, making sure that we're driving the climate, driving the changes to the climate change, as well as driving down carbon emissions and the net zero targets. And Ericsson has really been working for this for long period of time. We've even been reporting on it for the past 25 years with our research and innovation projects. And what we really conclude is that as much as we as an industry only stand for 1.5% of the carbon emission, if we work across these collaborations, and you were mentioning all these industries coming together, we see that together we will be able to drive down at least minus 15% down until 2030. So we see that coming together is really going to be the way of making a real change.
Makes sense that you're here at Green Business Verge then, because that is our entire ethos.
Exactly.
And you kind of already answered this question, but I'm going to ask it again, which is, what is Ericsson doing to address climate change? You talked about coming together. What else is Ericsson, all about?
I think it's a good question, and I think I would say the 2 different parts. One part is that how do we as a company ourselves make a difference? So we have actually accelerated our targets on the net zero 2040. So we have said that by 2030 we as a company should be net zero in all of our operations. So we accelerated that part. And then the second part is how do we work with our suppliers, looking at our portfolio. When you look at the 5G portfolio as you drive, building the wireless networks of the future, we see a factor of 10 that it's improving in energy efficient and energy consumption. So making sure that by 2040 we will cross our value chain with all of our suppliers and cross our portfolio be at net zero. And really what we've done, and as I mentioned, we've done a lot of research over the years, and just last week we released a report, Breaking the Energy Curve, where we talk about the different aspects of how we need to work in this. We talk about the portfolio, as I mentioned, to make sure that we have energy efficient portfolio and products. We also talk about how do we plan and build our network with our customers, and how do we do that in a good way. And the third way is actually how we operate it, because that's also the long term. How do we run and operate these networks? And here we see that there's a lot of improvements to be done in tools and processes, and this is where we look at, for example, AI and then how that can help us.
Yeah, can you speak more about that specifically? Like, what role does AI play in sustainability?
It's a very good question, and I think AI has been at the center now for many years on how we can build smarter networks and act in a better way, really to drive down that energy consumption in the network. Because as much as our portfolios and products are driving less energy, at the same time we all know we're asking more and more of our phones, of our devices, more and more traffic, and that performance is extremely important for everyone. So what we really see is that we need to continue put research and innovation in this area. So what I'm extra proud of, since I am from Canada, is that we launched just now a research project with 3 of the main Montreal universities, ETS, Concordia and Polytechnique, to really have to drive a research innovation project. So it's a three-year research project with over 30 researchers, professors, and then the data scientists from Ericsson Global AI Center, which is placed in Montreal, and really to find what are those areas where we can cooperate and collaborate really to drive the energy consumption. And in the end, I think these types of research partnerships that will really help Ericsson, but also all of a bigger partnership, really drive down and reach our net zero targets and get the carbon emissions down.
Thank you so much, Jeanette, for sharing. We look forward to learning more about Ericsson. We appreciate you being on Sidebar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Now, a word from our sponsors.
Every action can have far-reaching consequences. Making a positive impact on the world is at the heart of all we do at Amgen. We've pioneered greener, more efficient ways to operate, creating greener ways to conduct research and development, and a new way to manufacture medicines, to conserve water, curb carbon emissions, reduce solid waste, and operate with a dramatically smaller footprint. And our impact will be felt far and wide.
It's the things you can't see that make all the difference. Making things work, no matter what. The systems the world depends on. For life itself. Making the invisible invaluable. That's what we do at Black & Veatch. We're building a world of difference.
We're looking to see where the puck is sliding to, and we're thinking that ultimately zero carbon is where we have to get to. It should be local. ClearTrace is helping us see where we're at today, and I think that as kind of protocols shift in this direction, we'll be well ahead of the pack.
Hello, welcome back. We are here with Rosie Mastrandrea, Senior Director of Sustainability Product Marketing at Microsoft. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
You bet. Good to see you both.
Yeah, so nice to see you. So we want to start off with Microsoft has been a leader in data management, accessibility and analysis. So how does your expertise in this area translate to Microsoft Cloud sustainability? And, how does this data-driven approach lead to optimal outcomes? And you can handle that any way you want.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, we've been on this journey for a while. Obviously, we've been working in the data space for a really long time, and then on the sustainability journey for over 10 years now. And so we started as pretty much our own customer number one, building tools and figuring out ways to identify data sources and bring it together. And then based on those learnings, be able to put that together into solutions for our customers. And so always looking to iterate and get feedback. And we've been pretty excited to have that come to market in the cloud for sustainability this June of this year. So based on being able to take those learnings and apply them for others to help us meet our goals and help others meet their goals, that's really how we're trying to optimize the product and the solutions.
Got it. So accessing the right data plays a pretty key role in companies really being able to report on their emissions. So how do different types of data inputs and insights come together in Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability?
Yeah, data is the real conversation, especially when we're talking to customers. It's really a data story first, and so we've really embraced that in the approach that we have. And so really helping customers understand what are the different data sources within their organizations, across their business units, the different activities, and then looking across their value chain as well, and then bringing them into the cloud for sustainability so that they can calculate their emissions, be able to understand a baseline of where they are, set their goals, and then be able to get some insights on actions to take to then actually get to the reductions in emissions so that they can meet their goals as well. And so the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability, we think of it kind of like as an umbrella, and there's many parts to it, and it's the sustainability manager that customers use to connect their data in. And it's not just customer data. This is where partner solutions are really critical too. Like there's lots of companies out there who are collecting last mile type of data for all different utilities, all different types of data sources. And so it's really, from my perspective, a community-based approach. None of us are going to be successful alone. No person, no company.
Right.
And so if we think about this as a data layer that's for everybody, Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions from one company is going to be Scope 3 from another company. And so if we can get this in a common format and a common data layer, then we're really helping each other with that transparency and be able to make progress collectively towards hopefully the shared goals that we have with the planet.
Totally. You mentioned working with your customers. I'm curious if you can share examples of customers and maybe actions they've taken based on the data that they've been able to get from the cloud.
Yeah, one of the things that we hear, one of the first things we hear as they start to use the Microsoft Sustainability Manager is just the time that it saves. So many customers have been doing manual work, if you think Excel spreadsheets and like just pulling all types of different data together in different formats. It's just so manual. And so being able to automate connections into one place is a huge time saver. So really then they're able to spend their time on identifying where are there opportunities to be making an impact and reduce the environmental impact of their own operations.
Great. Thanks so much. We look forward to learning more about Microsoft and everything that you all are doing. Thanks for being on Sidebar.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course.
And now a word from our next sponsor.
A tree can be an answer to our global challenges. It's time the world knew everything a tree can be. Let's plant more trees where they're needed most. Let's grow a better tomorrow.
Climate Trade is the first climate marketplace that enables companies to take direct action in the fight against global warming. Our platform brings together the biggest sustainability projects in the world and guarantees investment and real cross-cutting impact. These investments allow our clients to meet their environmental commitments by offsetting their carbon footprint.
Okay, we are back with our next interview, Dr. Shweta Chakraborty, who is a climate behaviorist and U.S. president for We Don't Have Time. Woo! Welcome to Sidebar.
Thank you for having me here.
All right, so for folks who don't know what We Don't Have Time is, can you just explain a little bit about what your organization does?
Yeah, so we are the largest social media for climate solutions. What that means is we have our own platform and app, which users can download for free and immediately get connected to other users around the world to talk about different actions that are being taken on climate change. What are some solutions? How do we scale these solutions? How do we accelerate together, really seeing through solutions to the climate crisis? So we knew that
there was a need for this type of app and platform, and we decided we were going to launch it 6 years ago. That's what We Don't Have Time is. But it also requires key partnerships. So we partnered with Twitter, Spotify, soon LinkedIn, and our platform is where these conversations around climate solutions start, but then they make their way through the social media landscape. So you can continue them on LinkedIn, you can continue them on Facebook, and ultimately the end goal is coming together to collectively, we can solve this climate crisis.
I love that. That is the running theme throughout all of these interviews. So you yourself are a human risk and behavioral scientist, which is incredibly cool. So what does that role entail, and how does it connect to human reactions to the climate crisis?
Yeah, it wasn't so cool when I graduated in it, like 15 plus years ago, without giving away my age too, obviously. But now it's definitely something that society is beginning to recognize is critical to seeing through solutions to the climate crisis, right? We've got so many tools and so many technologies to address climate change, but we're in a communications crisis too, because now we need to deploy these tools. We need to get the political will and make sure policymakers make the tough decisions to actually see these tools into commercial viability so we can, again, solve this climate crisis. So as a behavioral scientist, 15 years ago, it was hard to kind of explain how important it was to communicate and use the science of communication to communicate solutions to really see through behavioral widespread change across society. So we could adopt these tools, we can get behind it, we can get behind policies that are evidence-based. And now being a behavioral scientist in this role at We Don't Have Time, I get to make sure that this social media platform that we have is incorporating all of the advances in behavioral and communication science. Are we making sure the way we reach people actually reaches them, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to just put information out there. Are you sure it's going to resonate? Our audience is going to actually act on it in the way that you were hoping and intending? So that's behavioral science. So making sure that your comms tool is not just dropping information into the ether, but rather we're actually predicting behavioral outcomes. We're predicting societal support of solutions to the climate crisis.
Yeah, that feels important just because we're thrown so much information every day. So for this message to actually reach people and resonate, it has to be strong for sure.
And it has to take into account what different perceptions are that different audiences already have. Yeah. Some people, you might just be saying the wrong thing completely, and so it's in one ear and out the other. So taking the time to understand what people care about, what values they have, what misconceptions or erroneous beliefs might be there, makes your communications that much more impactful.
And as two members of the editorial team, that is incredibly impactful for us in our writing and how we want to communicate our own stories. And so I just want to wrap this up, but there's one point that I thought was really interesting, which is human behavior is predictable. I mean, you have phrases like history repeats itself. Right. So given humanity's reaction to the climate crisis thus far, do you think there's any chance of us breaking our predetermined patterns?
Because we know how the brain works now, right? We know what the quirks of our wiring is, and it worked out for us to reach this point in where we are in the world at this time of life of humans since the dawn of our species, right? So we know, we have so much more knowledge, we know how our brains work. Based on that, I have serious hope that we can overcome some of that wiring that isn't helpful to us, that allows us to ignore things like climate change and care too much about things like, I love a Britney Spears story, okay, but care too much about pop culture, maybe obsess too much over politics and what our political identities are. So if we can actually take what we know about how the brain works, apply it to closing that gap between people's perceptions and reality, making people acknowledge that we need to come together and come up with solutions to climate, we can do anything. We can totally overcome this climate crisis.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. It feels positive. Yes! Thank you so much for joining us at Sidebar. We're looking forward to your talk later today.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it too.
Thanks. Great. Now, a word from our sponsors.
What is vitality? Vitality is life. Vitality is energy. Vitality is passion. Vitality is change. Vitality is vital. But what is vital? Touch is vital. Love is vital. Breath is vital. Food and air and water and soil and nature, the earth is vital. But for who? A vital earth for mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, farmers, fishers, ranchers, teachers, students,
Snakes, ospreys, zebras, coral, cattle, communities. Everyone and everything on Earth. Everyone. A vital Earth for everyone.
Welcome back. We are here with Don Wright, Chief Scientist at ESRI or ESRI, whichever you want.
It's all good.
So, you're a marine geologist, which
yes,
is a very unique role, and I think something I want to dig into a little bit.
Okay.
So, what's some of the most exciting climate tech you've seen that impacts that very specific field?
Well, climate tech for marine geology is very fascinating because marine geology is about the study of the ocean floor, which is far away from what we consider to be climate. But at the same time, I work for a mapping company, and we map the ocean floor as well as the parameters that affect what happens there in terms of especially the heat on the bottom of the ocean. Heat on the bottom of the ocean circulates, especially from places where there have been volcanic eruptions or earthquakes. Similar to what we've just experienced here, in fact.
Like today.
But the ocean writ large is really an engine for climate. And so mapping any aspect of the ocean, from the bottom of the ocean all the way up to the surface, is really what's important. So the tech there are all types of mapping vehicles, the instruments that actually listen to the sounds in the ocean and how sounds are reflected. That's how we can actually map that part of the world.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, so I know based on reading some of your work and also some of the work that Heather Clancy has done talking to you is that oceans are a largely untapped resource for the climate crisis. I feel like you kind of spoke to that a little bit more. Are there any specific things that you want to see from companies or governments when it comes to like actually using the ocean to address the climate crisis?
Yes, the ocean is really buying us time in terms of the climate crisis. And so if companies could take advantage of that, for instance, the oceans are absorbing about 25% of the carbon dioxide that's emitted in the atmosphere, emitted by us. And so I think a really exciting area now is carbon dioxide uptake and how to do that effectively, safely, sustainably, how to take advantage of how the ocean is able to do that. The ocean is also a huge it absorbs 90% of the heat of the planet. So that is actually an alternative energy pathway as well. We can get lots of energy from that heat that is absorbed by the ocean. There is really interesting research that's going on now in terms of geothermal energy from the ocean. So, and of course we know about siting wind energy and wave energy in the ocean. That's really important as well. So I'm glad to see the industries going in those directions.
Yeah, it's incredibly exciting to watch. And my question is always, are there any misconceptions you see about the ocean and sustainability within the ocean, or I guess a lack of sustainability with the ocean that you want to clear up?
Oh my goodness, yes. A lot of people think that with the ocean it's out of sight, out of mind, and that we can continually dump things in the ocean. It's gone, the ocean takes care of it. So that is a complete fabrication, a complete myth. We're having all of this trouble with plastic, as we know, in the ocean. And one of the things that really struck me as I went to the bottom, the deepest place that you could go in the ocean this summer, is that we saw a small species of shrimp. It's an amphipod, and it's called Erythrines plasticus because it's the first species ever discovered with plastic already entrained in its tissues. So we're already affecting, everything that we do is affecting all parts of the ocean. So we've got to get away from this idea that we can just dump things in the ocean, certainly. But the oceans, for all the crises that they are experiencing, they're a huge source of solutions for us.
Wow. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you on stage later during the conference about the oceans. Thank you so much for joining us on Sidebar, Dawn.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Sustainable innovation, delivering technology to our customers to increase productivity per acre while minimizing ag's environmental footprint and increasing global food security. At Corteva, we've assembled some of the world's brightest minds to discover, develop, and deliver the next generation of sustainable crop protection and seed solutions. We're reimagining the global food production system, solving some of our greatest global challenges today and accelerating solutions for tomorrow, for generations to come.
The first keynotes of Verge 22 are going to begin in just a couple minutes. The room here in San Jose is starting to fill up, which is very exciting.
It is bumping. That's what I like to say. Whether anybody at home will know what that means, I'm teaching you. This is communication.
I'm curious, Leah, did anything stand out to you during the interviews that we just moderated?
I mean, other than the fact that there's a species of shrimp that has plastic in its tissue?
Yeah, I'm shook by that, to be honest.
I mean, I know we talked to other people and they were incredible, but that is just like blotting out that's all I'm seeing now is just shrimp and plastic is floating in front of me.
Yeah. All right, well, the keynotes are about to start. Thank you so much for joining us for Sidebar.
Thank you.
So much of confronting climate change is about fixing what we humans have gotten wrong. And while it's true that we're the ones who created this mess, we're also the ones who can chart the path out of it. When was the last time you asked yourself what it could look like if we got things right? After all, addressing the climate crisis isn't just about avoiding a catastrophe. It's about helping a future unfold that's more resilient and prosperous for people, businesses, and communities. For everyone, everywhere. We're here to realize a bold and beautiful vision. The vision of a generous and abundant world where we harness the power of human ingenuity, technology, and community to address the existential challenges before us. We're here to create a world that supports all life on Earth. This is the potential of humanity, the promise of climate tech, and the power of Verge.
The power of Verge. The power of Verge begins with place, with an acknowledgement of this land and of the Ohlone peoples, who are the ancient stewards of it, who still live here today. We begin from this place because accelerating a just transition to a clean economy future must include working to heal injustices from the past, as well as the present. The power of Verge is in choosing to meet this moment. A moment that is as promising as it is precarious, in which we've never had more tools to address our global challenges, in which the momentum towards climate progress has never been greater, just as the tipping points are tipping, and our window to avert them is closing. The power of Verge lies in our attitude and our agency. It lies in looking just past the doom and the gloom and seeing that we have the solutions to create a world that works for all. It lies in looking at our planetary boundaries and seeing that we know how to not only live and work within them, but to help restore and rebalance them. It lies in looking at the forces working against us, political, economic, and others, and continuing to show up, knowing that we are on the right side of progress, of science, and of history. The power of Verge is that the kind of solutions that we're here to accelerate will create cascading benefits and opportunities. Opportunities to build a smarter, cleaner, more resilient economy. One that mitigates climate change while strengthening our capacity to adapt and thrive in the face of it. One that increases biodiversity, that improves people's lives today, while ensuring a more just and prosperous tomorrow. The power of Verge is that together, we are a part of something much larger than ourselves. Larger than any one technology, company, or industry. Larger than the nuts and bolts of decarbonizing the grid or getting to net zero. And yet, each of these pieces, and each one of you, represent vital components of this larger whole. A whole that ultimately includes harnessing the power of technology to realize our potential as humanity, to not just sustain, but to restore and regenerate life on this planet. And with that, I welcome you to Verge 22 and to the future. And to this future that we are here to help unfold. We're so glad that you're here. Over the course of the next 3 days, we hope that you are able to connect to this power and that it's fed by a sense of being a part of the Verge community. Because it doesn't really matter whether this is your first Verge or your 10th. Whether you're here to figure out how to procure more clean energy, identify new investments, or find your next career move. Verge is a home for the burgeoning climate tech community, nearly 4,000 strong here in San Jose this week, representing the diverse industries, sectors, and perspectives needed to confront the climate crisis. We need all of us working together to address the existential challenges before us. And we know that our power lies not only in the technologies, policies, and new business models at the heart of Verge, but in the human relationships that accelerate them. In the cross-pollination that occurs when we extend beyond our silos, expand our thinking, and connect with the new potential partners, customers, and allies that you're here to find. In fact, forging and building these relationships is exactly what we hope you do, in sessions and lines over meals and drinks, and it's why we're going to start by connecting with each other right now. Consider this. What piece of the climate tech puzzle brought you to Verge? I invite you to reflect on this as the house lights come up, and that includes all of you tuned into the global live stream. Hang tight. Because then I would like to invite you to turn to someone, ideally whom you don't know, and connect on this for just a minute. Go. Oh my God, dry mouth, dry mouth. Could you tell that I had horrible dry mouth? All right. The good news is that you get to keep doing this all week. You just get to keep going. Okay, now, it's one thing to talk about what brought you to Verge. And what matters most is what we do from here. So please, make the most of your time here this week. Let it energize your visions and ambitions to be the kind of bold, courageous leaders that this transformation needs. Because Verge is about solutions. Real, powerful solutions that are available today. It's about opportunity and possibility, connectedness and community. It's about realizing the future that we all want to see, and that together we have the power to achieve. When I wake up in the morning, love, to news of sea level rise, the tipping points of global warming, love, bear heavy on my mind. But then I look at you, and the world's all right with me. Yes, Anna! Everything you do makes me believe it's gonna be a lovely day.
Lovely day, 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 lovely day. When the challenges ahead of us seem impossible to face, we can anchor in the vision of a thriving human race. 'Cause when I look at you, the climate tech community, everything you do makes me believe it's gonna be a lovely day. Lovely day, 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 lovely day.
So let's use our power and collaborate. Change the system, change the world. We'll solve climate change and so much more. A better future will unfold. 'Cause when I look at you,
the climate tech community, everything you do makes me believe it's gonna be
a lovely day.
Lovely day, 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 lovely day.
Come on, everybody! This is our future to create! Stand up and join in if you feel moved! Let's go create a lovely future, shall we? All right. All right. Please, if you will, join me in welcoming a leading light on climate action, a friend of GreenBiz from right here in San Jose, Mayor Sam Liccardo.
Sorry, no singing or dancing for me.
Oh my God.
Welcome, Verge.
Could you tell on camera that I have total dry mouth?
Make no little plans, says architect Daniel Burnham. They hold no magic to stir the blood.
I just did that.
Make big plans, bold and high in hope. Welcome to San Jose in the heart of Silicon Valley, the epicenter of big plans and big ideas, and apparently big earthquakes as well. Thank you to each one of you. I know that you are the change makers, the doers, the innovators, at a time when we so critically need big plans and big ideas for the most daunting challenge facing humanity, that of climate change. You're in the right place. Where do we begin as we think about tackling this challenge? Each of you are taking on your piece of it, I know. Here in the city of San Jose, we just started with a small piece. It happens to be the largest machine on the planet, and it's called the grid. I think many of us recognize a pretty simple reality, which is if we cannot transform our electricity generation from fossil fuels to renewables, we're not going to be able to accomplish much in this great challenge. As we think about where to start with the grid, probably help if we also started with cities, because cities generate about 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions on our planet. The problem is you look at the largest 10 cities in the United States, from San Jose and Dallas all the way up to LA and New York, most of them still primarily rely upon fossil fuels to generate electricity. Here in the state of California, we've set ambitious goals that by 2045, we're going to decarbonize the grid. Is that a good thing? Of course it is. But I think, as we all know, by 2045, the entire state of California is going to drop about a foot in elevation because of sea level rise. So climate change isn't just coming, it's here. And we need to be bolder, and we need to accelerate our work. So here in the city of San Jose, we've set a bigger plan, a bolder goal. By 2030, we're going to decarbonize the grid in San Jose. Now you say, it's easy for you to say that, Sam. You're going to be out of office by then. It's going to be some other mayor's problem. And you'd be right. But I happen to be confident about this one because we had a little head start. Because today, as we speak, our 1 million residents and tens of thousands of businesses are receiving electricity that's 95% GHG free. And I say GHG free because, yes, we're using some nuclear and some hydro. Nuclear will be phasing out here in California in a few years. But how do we do it? Well, we launched a community choice energy program back in 2018. We became the largest city in the country to do it. And now cities, of course, throughout the state of California and elsewhere are understanding the value of providing the choice to our residents and businesses to choose a greener source of electricity. And we're not doing it simply by gobbling up existing supplies of renewables. We're doing it by procuring new wind and solar. 1.3 gigawatts over the next decade. And how are we going to manage the intermittency and reliability issues? Well, we're going to ensure that 500 megawatts are procured of storage. So yes, we're going to have reliable electricity and it's going to be green. Once we can get to decarbonizing the grid, so much more becomes possible. Here in this region, we're investing more than $11 billion on electric transit, everything from extending BART through downtown San Jose to electrifying Caltrain to a host of other measures. Got all electric bus fleets at the airport, and on and on. We became the largest city in the country to mandate that all new construction of residential and commercial buildings be electric only. And of course, we're going to need a lot of electric cars. And we're pushing hard in the city of San Jose to deploy a lot of EV infrastructure. And as of this month, as we looked at new car registrations in the city of San Jose, 30% of new cars purchased this year are electric. We are moving quickly past the tipping point. So the future is here. And you all know this because you're accomplishing tremendous things in your own communities. But while the future is here, it is not evenly distributed, as we know. And that's where we all come in. We need to challenge one another in our own communities. And maybe through another mechanism that's going to move the needle in our battle against climate change. You may be doing it better than we are. But one way or another, we need to learn from you. And we need you to push the rest of the country along so we can get there together. This is our great common endeavor. Thank you for being here to be a part of this, to be part of the conversation, and more importantly, to be leading the action. I look forward to working with all of you in the months and years ahead as we accomplish this great endeavor, which is the most important of our generation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I want to invite all of you standing in the back. This is an excellent moment, why not now, to come and find new friends and find seats, because we're in this together and there are plenty of seats if you want. Here to deliver our first official Verge talk of Verge 22. I am so delighted to introduce the former Chief Technology Officer for the United States of America, now currently the co-author of Speed and Scale, alongside venture capitalist icon John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins. Please join me in welcoming, to offer a very fresh take on solving the climate crisis with speed and scale, Ryan Panchadsaram.
Hi, Verge. Hello, Verge. So I'm here for the same reason you are. And it's that we have a climate crisis. Oops, we go back one slide. A little too excited. I'm here for the same reason you are. And that's because we have an emissions crisis. And like you, I want to find out how to solve it. And the fact is, we have released far too many greenhouse gases into our atmosphere like it's a free and open sewer. And the fact is, more than 50% of that has happened in the past 30 years, since 1990. When you look and tap into the scientists, the best out there from the UN and the IPCC, they say that we have a carbon budget. And so to date, we've emitted 2,380 billion tons into the atmosphere of greenhouse gases. And what that's done is it's led to the 1.1 degrees of warming that we experience today. And if we emit 400 more gigatons, well, we get to that 1.5 degree target that we all keep talking about. We emit more, it'll be 1.7. We emit more, it'll be 2. Oops, to go back. Sorry about that. One more back as well, too. I will be gentle with this. When you look at the budget that we have of the 400 gigatons, and if we emit 59 billion tons a year today, I'm not even touching this. We blow through that budget in the next 10 years. And with the current pace of emissions, as well as the policies that we have, it's very likely we're going to end up at this 3-degree world. So, what is the plan? how do we as a society go from 59 billion tons of emissions each year down to zero? Together with John Doerr, the acclaimed venture capitalist, pioneering clean tech venture capitalist, we set out to try to answer that question. What's the plan? And so we tapped into the brains of 100 different experts, activists, policymakers, scientists, entrepreneurs, investors, and innovators, and we came up with the Speed and Scale plan. And it's based on objectives and key results, OKRs. How many people in this room know what OKRs are? Yes, you know you're in Silicon Valley when that number is very high. And so we've got ourselves 10 objectives, and we've paired them with 3 to 5 key results, all time-bound, all measurable, the measures that we have to change to get to net zero. And so let me go through them to show you how we get to zero. First, we've got to electrify transportation. And what we have to do there is switch to electric vehicles, get rid of gas and diesel. We have to then decarbonize the grid, really ending coal. We need to tap into more solar, wind, nuclear, and other forms of storage. We've got to fix food, and the piece there isn't to be vegan, it really is to eat less beef, lamb, and cheese. You do that, we cut down emissions by a ton. We've got to also compost, waste less, and treat our soil with a lot more respect. We then have to protect nature, quite simply ending deforestation, as well as protecting our oceans and peatlands and grasslands. We've got to clean up industry. Concrete and steel are really hard. And then we've got to remove that stubborn carbon that's left over. We do these 6 objectives, we will go from 59 to 0. But we've got to do it quicker, right? To beat that budget, we've got to cut emissions in half by the end of this decade and get to 0 by 2050. So we're going to lean on 4 accelerants, things that you and I and everyone in this room control. We've got to win the politics and policy, so making bold commitments and following through with legislation, like the Inflation Reduction Act here in the US. We've got to turn movements into action that's everywhere from the ballot box to the boardroom. We've got to innovate, which is really driving down the cost of clean energy and technologies. And then we have to invest in R&D, in venture capital, in project finance, and philanthropy. We do these 4 accelerants, it's pretty sure that this transition is going to happen faster. We launched a website called speedandscale.com that looks at each and every one of those key results and tracks our progress on them. And so we color them, right? Blue for being achieved, green for meaning strong momentum, yellow if it's limited progress, orange if it's off track, or red if it means code red. And when you look for the positive news, right, the things that are blue and green, what you see is this acceleration of EV adoption. You see the cost of solar and wind dropping. You see that we deployed over $57 billion into venture capital last year. All the really positive things. But when you drill in on the code red, and code red are the things that are off track, that are in the gigaton range, you see that we have a lot of work to do. We've got to stop these coal plants from burning. We've got to stop methane leaks. We've got to shorten, consume less beef. We've got to end deforestation, and as you can see, there's a lot of work still to do on steel, concrete, and the materials that we use. There's also a handful of other key results that fall into the code red category. And so, quick question, how many people in this room work at a Fortune Global 500 company? Let me see, raise of hands. How many people now buy from a Fortune Global 500 company? Which is all of us here. And so I'm going to drill into a key result that actually everyone in this room can help shape. Key result 8.3. This key result here is about businesses. It's the commitments we make. And this key result is tracking that 100% of the global Fortune 500 has a clear net zero goal by 2040. And like for all of you who said OKRs, if you craft a key result, you've got to go and measure it. And so with my colleagues Quinn, Jonathan, and Julian, and myself, we went to all 500 of your websites and looked at those PDFs, looked at the ESG reports to see what commitments were being made. And what we found is just 2.8% had a clear net zero goal for 2040, and only 5% had it for 2050. That means less than 30 companies have a clear net zero goal. And you're going to say, but Ryan, we all have commitments. We have these websites. I've seen them. And the truth is about 50% of companies in the Fortune 500 have a commitment, but when you dig into what it means to be Scope 3, well, some companies just don't include it. Other companies have also redefined what Scope 3 counts as. You see some companies that have a carbon commitment, but leave out methane, leave out the industrial gases. And then when you talk about net zero, you don't specify how you intend on using carbon removal. And so if I leave you with one thing here today, is that if we set bold and ambitious and clear goals, that's how we can have, as an industry, the fastest way we can get to net zero. So bold and clear goals. So how do you set a clear net zero goal? Well, first, it's covering all 3 scopes, 1, 2, 3. It's then covering all greenhouse gases, not just carbon, methane, nitrous oxide, and all the industrial gases. It's committing to use removal. When you look at the IPCC definition, that's what it says. To be a net zero commitment, that's what it has to be. And then you got to set a date, 2050, 2040, or like ambitious colleagues around 2030. And what you do is on your website, you have just very clear language. I mean, we poured through the 150-page PDFs, and all we were looking for these sets of words. It's that we are committing to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040 across scopes 1, 2, 3. And then somewhere else saying, and to achieve net zero, we're committed to removing our excess emissions through carbon removal. So the road to net zero is going to be really hard. But with clear goals, every employee, every supplier, and every customer knows exactly where we're headed. And that's really critical. We need to show people where we're going. And so this transition is going to be one of the the largest economic transformation of our lifetimes. Like John Doerr says, the economic opportunity here will be bigger than the internet. And so it's also the imperative of our lifetime. So the playbook is simple. It's that we've got to commit to an aggressive goal, a clear net zero goal. We then have to do everything we can in our power to cut our emissions, right? Picking the cleaner, greener alternative. We then have to invest in energy efficiency to make better use of the energy we have. And then we have to remove what's left. I would walk off right now, but I'm forgetting to say one of the magic words that we like to use often to try to solve a lot of our problems, and that's offsets. So, Ryan, what about offsets? Well, the truth is, if we have to lean on removal, today, the carbon removal market for both engineered and nature-based is very expensive, and there's not enough supply. And so if we want that market to exist when we have our 2040 and 50 goals, we have to catalyze that market. And so what we have to do there, and actually before I do that, how many people in this audience actually buy carbon removal as an organization? This is good to see, a few hands. And so I know for a lot of folks, you're wondering, well, how much am I supposed to buy? How can I be a carbon catalyst? And one of the recommendations we have is start by buying at least 0.1% of your emissions as carbon removal. And when you start there, you can see that market going. But then, Ryan, what about the other kinds of offsets? The avoidance, the reduction, the protection ones? You know, definitionally, by the way, those are things like funding solar projects, cleaner coal, cooking stoves, and protecting forests. While those definitionally don't work towards your net zero math for your company, they're so important for the world and our world's net zero goals. And so the message there is, well, what we have to do here is buy the highest quality reduction and protection offsets so we can neutralize our emissions on our march to net zero. So what do we do about offsets? We've got to do both. We've got to catalyze this removal market as well as neutralizing our emissions as we get there, right? Neutralizing to net zero. So back to that one thing. The one thing that we can do, maybe at the end of this week or even after this set of keynotes, is take a look at what your climate commitment is. Does it include all scopes? Is it across all GHGs? And do we define how we're going to tackle getting to net zero at the end using removals? Setting a clear one, if you need help, feel free to reach out. But the message I'll leave with is, if we have great goals, we can save the planet. Thank you.
It's easy to lose sight of what we're getting right. The effects of climate solutions are starting to be realized. Limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius is still within reach. Let's zoom in on how far we've come, upshot by upshot. We are on our way to electrifying everything. The price of solar panels and wind turbines has come down by more than 90%. We're making cheaper batteries, heat pumps, electrolyzers, and capital is flowing in the right direction too. Last year, almost $1 trillion was invested in clean energy, an increase of 25% year on year. Did you know that in 2021, 85% of all new additions to the global grids were renewable, mostly wind and solar? 50% alone were solar. Much of this shift is thanks to China, a country that historically was a major source of pollution and now is a major source of solutions. China is now producing as much wind and solar energy as Europe produces electricity. Combined with low-cost wind, this cheap electricity will spill over into all sectors of the economy, and the world is going to need it, because fossil fuels are only getting more expensive and risky. Hundreds of millions of humans still don't have access to any electricity at all. Energy demand from Africa and Southeast Asia will grow exponentially in the coming decades. It's time to share the love of low-cost solar power for all. Let's talk about the remarkable adoption of electric vehicles. In Norway, almost 100% of new cars are electric. By 2035, this will be true in California too. Policy changes in America mean everything from trucks to school buses will soon be electric, and these EVs are driving real-world change. Global oil consumption peaked in 2019, and even post-COVID, consumption has flattened and is expected to trend down throughout the 2020s. Why? The electrification of 2- and 3-wheelers, the motorbikes, mopeds, rickshaws, and tuk-tuks of Asia significantly reduced oil demand in 2022. And it's not just transport and mobility that's changing. Global alternative protein companies secured $5 billion in investments in 2021. That's up 60% from $3 billion in 2020. In California, residents and businesses are now required to divert 23 million tons of organic waste from landfill into compost, mulch, and renewable energy. That's just a taste of what's possible when we tackle food waste. A recent study showed that composting and waste segregation worldwide could be the equivalent of taking all the cars off the road in the US. The building sector is also getting disrupted. Think smart concrete, low-carbon materials, and weatherized structures. The good news? Up to 80% of the solutions we need to decarbonize buildings exist today. The average American household is set to receive over $10,000 to fully electrify their homes. This is making electrification affordable for the first time. And yet, carbon dioxide is still relentlessly rising. But did you know that US emissions peaked 15 years ago? New policy initiatives mean it's set to decrease another 40% by 2030. Even China looks like it will peak this decade. China's emissions fell about 1.4% in the first quarter of 2022, making it the third quarter in a row of reductions. Obviously, we've still got work to do. It's a race to determine whether we can achieve carbon drawdown fast enough. A big part of winning that race? Startups. They are one of our biggest hidden superpowers, powered by the huge amount of money flowing into climate tech companies and project development. And this is why we're here. It's time to double down on innovation, ingenuity, and transformation, and to remember that despite all the challenges, there is still time.
Yeah! Let's give it up for our partners at Future Keepers and New Energy Nexus for collaborating on those promising and inspiring climate tech upshots. Here to deliver our next Verge talk on one of the more perhaps untapped tools to keep this progress going, the power of our own psychology. Here to deliver this, I am so pleased to introduce a behavioral scientist and internationally acclaimed expert on risk and climate communication. Please welcome the US President of We Don't Have Time, Shweta Chakraborty.
Hello, everybody. What incredible energy in this room and at this conference, right? I was so impressed seeing you all stand up and dance, and thank you to you all for being here and engaging and being part of accelerating solutions to the climate crisis. One aspect of the climate crisis we don't talk so much about is how to apply social sciences, communication science, behavioral science to actually seeing some of these tools, technologies, and advances actually reach commercial viability and actually be accepted by the public, and then have the policymakers then, you know, that refrain we always hear, is there the political will to see through solutions to the climate crisis? Well, I'm telling you, if we apply behavioral science and communication science, we will see through these real advances in solving the climate crisis into reality. We will find that political will. So that's what I'm going to get into in this talk today. And so what we have that we all here collectively know is a planet that is unfortunately on fire. If you don't know, all you have to do is turn on the radio, turn on the television, and it's clear. There's hurricanes in the Western Hemisphere. They're called typhoons in Asia. We have wildfires in the Western United States and Australia. We are living in the real impacts of climate change now. And scientists have known this for decades, but really struggled with communicating this reality. It's why we find ourselves so woefully unprepared today. We should have done some of the things we've been talking about yesterday, right? But we are only just starting now. The reason for this is because until we were in this collective lived reality of climate change impacts, it was hard for us to process that these risks were actually serious. Climate change impacts decades ago were still seen as impacts that were far in the future, slow moving, issues that those were dealing with over there, not something we had to worry about over here. This was true pretty much for anyone, anywhere, except those who were the most vulnerable to impacts of climate. And that's not the case anymore. We're living in the real impacts of climate. And yet, there is still this disconnect between what we know to be true, because we're seeing it when we turn on the television, and our preparations for our communities, for our companies, for our families. We're still not preparing ourselves. There's still a disconnect. What is this? Why is this happening? I'm going to answer that with this lamp. And I promise you there's a connection here. So I'm going to ask you all, from a show of hands, consider this situation. There's a lamp you really want to buy. Next door, and it looks better than this, next door, this lamp is $40. Across town, you can buy this lamp for $20. How many of you, and don't be smart and say, how are you getting there? Are there carbon emissions because you're taking, a gas-fueled cart? Don't ask me any of that. How many of you would make the effort to go across town to buy this lamp for half off, $20 off? Raise your hand if the answer is yes to that. Okay, second scenario. There is a new electric car. You're really excited. Oh my gosh, I actually know so little about cars, I don't actually know where you go to buy a car. So there's a car, there's a dealer next door, and it's selling the car for $25,000. You find out there's a dealer across town that is selling the car for $24,980. Do you make the effort to go across town to buy that car for $20 off? How many of you would make the effort to go across town? Raise your hands. Okay. Very few of you participated in this, so we're doing this in a few slides. So I'm going to ask everyone to raise their hands for the next example. But think it through. How many of you made the same decision? How many of you switched your decision when I switched the actual example from a lamp to a car?
most people switch their decision. Most people will make the effort to go across town for the lamp, but would not do the same thing for the car. Even though it's $20, it's the same $20. But the reality is that just changing the framing, changing the numerical value around the actual $20 will change your behavioral outcome. And this is how human beings are predictably irrational. And it's what marketers and advertisers use for us all the time. And fine, we know this. We know that we are being taken advantage of based on understanding of the quirks of our brains, right? It's not a big deal if it's just marketing and you lose out on 20. It's a big deal when it actually has implications for us adapting to the real impacts of climate, to staving off worser case warming scenarios. That's when the quirks of our brains can really mess us up. And that's why it's so important for us to understand how our perceptions, how these context cues and framing effects lead to predictable behavioral irrational outcomes. So this is something that we know to be true, and this is something that has actually worked out for us pretty well for the most part, right? Because we know from the dawn of our species, our ancestors would have been were able to use the designing of our brains to react to risks around them. They would see a poisonous snake and they would jumpstart the response system to run away. And this worked out well. We're probably not related to anyone that didn't respond and react to the snake and run away, right? So we're glad that we have this, what we call system 1 processing in our brains. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman refers to this as system 1 processing. It's the idea that we do very simple risk analyses to be able to make a decision and move with it. We don't have time to analyze all of the different cues before we actually decide to cross a street or to respond to a snake or to catch a ball in the air, for example. So it's good that we have this processing. But the risk landscape around us has changed since that of our ancestors. We find ourselves in a complex, interconnected, global risk environment, and we need to override that innate wiring to be able to thoughtfully and carefully come up with the proactive preparedness strategies to protect us against what we know is a warming planet. So because of this should have been in some colors, so I'm sorry you can't see the colors. But because of this is why we overestimate certain risks, like plane crashes, and we underestimate certain risks like heat, like sea level rise. Let me ask you this. What is more likely to kill you? Shark attacks, and I want everyone to participate, or radon gas? How many of you say shark attacks? Okay, you're all getting clued into what I'm doing here. That's what's going on. This has been a few slides coming. And then how many of you say radon gas? All right, well, we're also in a part of the country that knows about radon gas. You should see how this works in New York City, I promise you. And so what we have is, the reality is that shark attacks kill in the single digits globally. Radon gas kills 20,000 just Americans alone, and is the second leading cause of lung cancer. Try this on your families and friends. Try this on social media even. See how many people say shark attacks. And it's because these types of risks are sensationalized. They are easy to recall. These are risks that are considered very they're sexy, which is not the best word to describe it, but they're the way that the media likes to catch people's attention and get headlines. And because they're easier to recall, we attribute more frequency and probability to the likelihood of them occurring. So you can see the flip side of that, why something like sea level rise or heat doesn't get the attention cognitively for us that it deserves. So we get this wrong because of things like how easily we can recall a risk. We get this from whether or not we can see a risk, right? All of that influences our perceptions. We are most influenced by trust, how much we trust who the person communicating about the risk is, how much we trust that person. So knowing that all of these different factors are triggers for how we cognitively assess risk, we actually are more empowered now. This is not a bad thing. The fact that our brains play these tricks on us is actually super helpful, because now we have the knowledge to overcome these quirks of our brains. We are in a dual crisis. We are in a climate crisis, we are in a communications crisis. For us to solve the communications crisis, we need to acknowledge and recognize that we fall prey to the biases of the context in which we operate. We are influenced by things outside of the actual decision at hand, and knowing this knowledge will make us that much better at communicating and closing that gap between the perception, or rather things not being so scary because we can't see it, or it's far in the future, and the reality of what we're
we're facing and what we have to do to proactively prepare to ensure that we are setting ourselves up to adapt to a world that is warmer and to make sure that those increasingly warmer scenarios never come into existence. So I charge you to actually take the time to challenge the perceptions that arise. Think through why you are overreacting or overestimating versus underreacting or underestimating the actual base rate statistics of various issues that come up in your day-to-day, in your work, as it relates to climate change. And charge your family and friends with this too. Find out how well calibrated you are. Do the research. Look it up. Actually look up the base rate statistics. Maybe you happen to know about shark attacks, but if you don't, look it up. Do your due diligence and close that gap between your perception and your reality. If we begin to transform ourselves as individuals, we can be that much more effective in our companies, help companies internally, across the value chain, across sectors, across society, and really encourage this widespread behavioral change that aligns to the reality of the risks we're facing, that aligns to the science and the evidence and the facts. And what will that bring on? Political will. The policymakers will be that much more receptive to push through policies that are aligned to the reality of what we're facing if they know they have the backing of the public, the backing of society. So this is really important that we take the time to do it. It's the missing piece of the puzzle. This is what I really hope that you will take away from this talk. Recognize that we are really infallible, have compassion, because we all are wired this way, regardless of where you are in the world. We all have this innate wiring of our brains, but we can overcome it by thoughtfully taking the time to think through how we close that perception and reality gap. Become better calibrated, charge your friends and families to do the same, and a tool that we've developed, a technology which I'm a big fan of, but again, we need the social sciences. Don't stop leaving out us social scientists. We need the behavioral scientists. We need the communication scientists. But download this technology. It's called We Don't Have Time. It's an app that will immediately connect you, and you can begin communicating and sharing what you learned here today. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen and for engaging with these activities. Thank you.
I'm Jim Giles, VP for Net Zero with GreenBiz. I want to talk about two seemingly contradictory things that are happening in carbon markets. One is the explosion of interest in carbon credits. There's so much demand that the market almost quadrupled between 2020 and 2021. Yet alongside this exponential growth, serious questions remain about the integrity of credits. Buyers can't yet be sure that a ton paid for means a ton of emissions avoided or removed. There's a lot of attention being paid to this problem, but some of the solutions don't hit the mark. My overhyped trend is the use of blockchain technologies to address the integrity of carbon markets. I don't mean that crypto solutions can't improve carbon markets. Storing credit data on blockchains might be efficient, but often I see crypto touted as the solution to the integrity problem, and I don't believe that it is. Why is that? Well, offsets have different kinds of problems. Some might have taken place without the revenue they generated from carbon credits. In offsets jargon, they weren't additional. Others cause leakage, meaning that they avoid emissions in one place but trigger more emissions elsewhere. Crypto won't fix these shortcomings, but I hope that my underhyped trend might do so. It's the growing awareness of MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification. MRV is simple in principle. It's the processes that provide assurance that offsets really do avoid or remove the carbon they claim to. In practice, this can be time-consuming and tedious. For agricultural projects, MRV means visiting farms and collecting soil samples. In forestry, it means keeping tabs, perhaps for decades, to confirm that protected forests really stay protected. The good news is that MRV is getting the attention it deserves. That's partly because buyers don't want to find themselves holding a credit that's revealed to be a dud, particularly when that fact becomes national news. Technology is also helping. In forests, for example, satellite imagery is increasingly being used to assess additionality and leakage. MRV isn't neat and tidy. It's not something that technology can swoop in and fix. But unless we get it right, the growth we're seeing in carbon markets won't translate into growth in the metric that really matters, which is getting to net zero quickly, measurably, and globally.
I'm Teresa Lieb, Senior Food Systems Analyst with GreenBiz.
Over the past few years, I've been delighted to see food climbing up the climate concern ladder of consumers, policymakers, and businesses. People finally recognize that we need to change how we produce and consume food to secure a livable climate. But this concern hasn't always led to the most impactful solutions. The overhyped trend I'm seeing today is the addition of more sustainable food options to menus, supermarket shelves, and online stores. For example, even fast food chains such as McDonald's, Burger King, and KFC now offer vegan menu items. I applaud these developments and the innovators making them happen. But I'm worried that companies will stop there, leaving it to consumers to buy sustainable products when it would be more impactful to change the food environment at large. This brings me to my underhyped trend, changing the default. Rather than giving consumers climate-friendly alternatives, companies need to make these options the standard. Such default shifts can be surprisingly simple and effective. In a pilot program, the coffee chain Blue Bottle swapped cow's milk for oat milk as the default ingredient in cappuccinos, lattes, and the like because it emits 75% fewer greenhouse gases. Oat milk consumption jumped 40% and is now the new normal in all Blue Bottle stores, while cow's milk is only served upon request. New York City has been experimenting with a similar approach in its hospitals, making plant-based meals the default lunch for patients. By marketing them as the chef's special, over half of the hospital's patients order these meals daily, with satisfaction ratings over 90%. Building on this success, the city is now expanding the program from lunches to dinners, which will impact more than 800,000 meals per year. From these and other pilots, we've learned that people care more about their food being delicious than anything else. So it's time for companies to update their recipes and transform climate-friendly eating from a privileged consumer choice into everyone's new norm.
The first in our series of Verge Over-Unders featuring the amazing Verge analysts who brought you this program. Shout out to the Verge team. Also, everyone standing in the back, this room is only set for 1,600, so you could probably find some seats. That was a joke. God, that didn't land. Please come in and find some seats. There are plenty of seats around if you want, again. Our next keynote conversation goes into a topic that may be as critically important to climate progress as it is underrepresented. A conversation not only about what we need to do, but who we are called to be in these times. And I am incredibly honored to welcome to the Verge stage two leaders who are walking the path of both personal and planetary transformation with tremendous integrity. Joe Confino, a veteran journalist and Zen mindfulness practitioner, and Christiana Figueres, who led the historic COP21 negotiations that resulted in Paris, not 21. Christiana has dedicated her life to the work that you're about to experience in this conversation, is now working with Global Optimism. Joining us all the way from France and Costa Rica, please join me in welcoming Christiana Figueres and Joe Confino.
Shana, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be here with everyone at Verge. Christiana, how lovely to see you. How are you doing?
Well, Joe, it's lovely to see you also. I've just been rescuing two iguanas out of a swimming pool so that they wouldn't drown. So going from that to this conversation is somewhat of a jump, or maybe not, but it is definitely part of my life here in tropical, wonderful Costa Rica.
So let's use that as a metaphor for the conversation together, which is how to stop us all from drowning. So,
okay, sounds good.
Christian, let's just pick that up, because I think we are all drowning at the moment. So we know all the science of what is happening to us in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss, etc. We've got all the research, we've got all the data, we've got actually most of the solutions, but actually we're not really making the moves and the scale of change we need. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you today was about how a spiritual grounding can actually start to change the dynamic of change. So tell us a little bit about maybe your journey, because actually spirituality and the teachings of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, who we both know very well, or knew very well, have been sort of instrumental in you starting to rethink the way we create change. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you think is the importance of spirituality in the dimension of climate change and biodiversity loss?
Well, maybe, Joe, I want to come to that, but through a preliminary channel, which is I am feeling more and more a concern, a deeper concern, that the predominant narrative on climate change now is shifting from optimism, constructive solutions, constructive thinking, over to doomism and paralysis of both thought and action. And I do think that that is a self-defeating shift, because if we convince ourselves that this is not doable from our point of view, then it won't be doable. It is only if we dig into our deep conviction that we have the agency to face the urgency, it is only then that we will stand a chance of addressing climate change without any guarantee that we can do so. So changing the predominant narrative is very important. And I don't think you can change the predominant narrative by simply pointing to the many different technologies that are already mainstream or are being developed, or the financial shift of trillions of dollars that are going into clean and new technologies, or the policies that can have effect. All of that is important. But as people, as individuals, we will not be open to that narrative of capacity, capability, agency, unless we touch that openness within ourselves, unless we are aware of the fact that we are incredibly powerful, that our thoughts, our words, and our actions have an effect on the outside world, and that therefore we can, if we choose to, and if we have the necessary intentionality, collectively, we can address climate change in the time frame that science has established. But it has to start at the roots of who we are, who we want to be in this world, and how we turn up in the world.
And Christiana, can you tell us a little bit about your own journey in this light, in terms of how this understanding of the transformation inside being fundamental to the transformation outside, how that, in a sense, took hold within yourself?
Well, that could be a very long answer, but let me choose two examples in the lead up to Paris specifically. I tend, as my habit energy, to pick up one or two or three or four pieces of fact and then jump to a conclusion. And that, I know, is my tendency. And not very helpful when you're trying to understand where everybody else is on a particular issue. So one of the practices that I put quite a bit of energy into in the lead up to the Paris Agreement was to what we call deep listening, so termed by our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. And deep listening actually has to do with not just hearing what the other person is saying, but listening deeply without judgment, without the overlay of our mental filters of what is right and what is wrong, and really being, both from your mind as well as from your heart, open to listen deeply to what the other person, the other country, the other CEO, the other governor, the other mayor of a city, whoever it is that you're talking to, really understanding what is their need, what is their interest, what is their long-term view. And to do so from a place, as I say, of openness of both heart and mind. That is a very different listening to simply asking someone, well, what is your position on paragraph 3, clause C of this legal text? It's a very different quality and brings the conversation to a very different level, because in deep listening, you begin to unearth where we are in common, the humanity that we have in common, the deep needs that we have in common. And from that space, it is then so much easier to begin to weave the different threads of interest and needs together into a coherent tapestry, let's say. And the other lesson learned on the way to Paris is that many of us, if not most of us, or perhaps even all of us, carry and enact something that I would call the perpetrator and victim syndrome, termed many things by different psychologists and sociologists, whereby we feel ourselves the victim of something, whatever. The victim of your mother as a child, the victim of your father, of your siblings, of society, of your boss, of your partner, of your child, whatever. We victimize ourselves. We victimize ourselves, and I really want to underline that, because being a victim is not a fact. It is a mindset, and we can change those mindsets. And the moment, however, that you put yourself into the victim mindset, by definition, you are already consciously or unconsciously accusing someone else of being the perpetrator. And so that victim-perpetrator syndrome was very prevalent and continues, I should say, to plague the climate negotiations. But as we drew closer to Paris, I realized that I myself, in my personal life, was very much participating in that victim-perpetrator syndrome, and I was boxing myself into thinking of myself as a victim, and hence accusing others of being perpetrators. And that as long as I stayed in that box, it was very difficult for me to, in my personal life, it was very difficult then to go out there into the outside world, into the negotiations, and ask countries, for example, the global north and the global south, that so often feel themselves in this victim-perpetrator syndrome, to actually step beyond that. And it wasn't until I was able to begin to crawl out of that, because in all honesty, I'm still working on it, but I had to at least begin to crawl out of that and loosen the hold of it on me, such that I was able to then bring others, those who were negotiating the Paris Agreement, also beyond their victim and perpetrator syndrome. So I tell these two stories because whatever goes on inside of us is very often reflected outside. And if our purpose is to change the outside world, then of course we have to be active in the outside world. But at the root of all of that, we have to be very attentive to what is going on in our inside world.
Thank you, Christiana. And which brings me to another question, which is around how we handle ourselves more generally, because you and I helped organize a retreat here in Plum Village in France at the monastery of Thich Nhat Hanh for 30 climate leaders. And what we experienced was that most of them are really strung out. They're overworking, they're burning out, they're overwhelmed, they're feeling despair. And by the end of it, when people had really spent time together and in quietness and slowing down, that people sort of started coming back and feeling more refreshed and ready to go back out into the world. So I'm just wondering what, for all the people here at Verge who may be sort of seeing the scale of the problems and putting all their efforts and all their energy, but also feeling that they're sort of fighting a losing battle, how can a sort of, in a sense, a spiritual grounding help them to sort of recognize the scale of the problems, but still stay refreshed and still stay happy and basically able to continue the fight?
Well, Joe, I actually think that that is a very important question that needs to be answered by each person individually, because we all burn out for different reasons and we all have different levers that we can use to try to help ourselves from that. So I wouldn't venture into answering that question in general. The only thing that I could do is to share my own situation there, which is frankly a daily burnout. This is not like, well, I'm burned out from November to December and the other months, I'm fine. No. I mean, I am old enough to have been in this for decades now. And I get up every morning and I have to make a choice. I have to make a choice about, especially, if after I am cognizant of the news of the day, then I have to make a choice of, okay, what of all of these realities is going to control my thinking, my actions, and my words today? Is it going to be all of the very justified evidence, proof points of disaster? And right now, we have many of them. I'm not even going to start on the list. Or am I going to realize that that is part of the reality that I am witnessing, that the world is witnessing and suffering? And, not a but, and that side by side with that reality, I can also choose, but only if I choose, to water, as we say in Plum Village tradition, to water the seeds of my own hope, of my own optimism, of my own love for humanity, of my own patience, of my own compassion. All of these seeds we have within us. And if we don't water them, it's very easy for the other realities of disaster and despair and grief and destruction and injustice. It's very easy for all of that to take over our daily life because we get so much information about it. And so it has to be a daily choice. Do I certainly not turn my back on that reality, but side by side, without thinking that these are mutually exclusive, but rather these are complementary? I have to intentionally water the potential that I have to bring about change, to shift thinking, to shift myself, to shift those around me, to shift everyone that I can influence. It is a choice, Joe, that I make every day. It's not that we can say, well, this is the moment of burnout, per month, whatever, and then the rest, I'm going to nurture myself. For me, and maybe this is not the case of everyone, I find that I have to nurture myself every day. And I have to make that choice every day because the proof points of negativity are so prevalent and are so quickly growing that if we do not meet that escalating curve with an escalating curve of hope, love, optimism, compassion, we will burn out. So it is simply and radically and difficultly a choice.
Thank you, Christiane. And what I think you do is it's a clarion call to each and every one of us is, as you say, to nurture ourselves, to look after ourselves so that we can look after the world around us. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Shana, back to you.
Thank you, Joe. So before we transition into our closing keynote for the day, I want to do the first of sort of a series of acknowledgements. First, to our sponsors, over 100 of this year's event. Thank you so much for recognizing the power of Verge, for investing in and supporting this community. We couldn't do it without you. And also, yeah, let's give it up for our sponsors. Thank you. And next, thank you to our partners, our community partners, our convening partners, our Accelerate partners. Thank you for all of your work across climate tech and the clean economy landscape, and for helping convene all of us together this week. I also want to take a moment to give a shout out to these fabulous ladies over at Sidebar, Diana and Leah. You can tweet your questions at this Sidebar throughout the week. They will be hosting programming for our global live stream before and after the keynotes. Thank you for holding it down at Sidebar. And last, I want to give a very special shout out to what we call emerging leaders. Emerging leaders, are you here up front? If so, I want to invite you to stand up. Emerging leaders. Our Verge 22 cohort of rising stars in the world of sustainable business and climate solutions. I urge you to find and connect with these young people throughout the week. I promise you, you will learn as much from them as they likely have to learn here, and have very deeply inspired conversations. So, keeping our horizons set on the next generation, our closing... Thank you, PwC, for your support of the Emerging Leaders Program as well. So, keeping our horizons set on the next generation, our closing keynote for today, I am so delighted to welcome to the Verge stage GreenBiz's co-founder and chairman, Joel McCower, Salesforce's fearless sustainability leader, Patrick Flynn, and internationally recognized and acclaimed youth climate activist, Alexandria Villaseñor. Please welcome them.
Wow. Hey, everybody. Can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah, we're good. I wish you could see what I see when I look out at you all. It is truly amazing. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to close out this session with talking about something that's not about tech. It's barely about climate. It's about the fact that everyone here, all y'all in here, out there watching this, need to engage everybody who's not in this room or watching this in some new ways. And nowhere is that really more important or impactful than companies engaging with youth culture. And so really excited to have down at the end, my old friend and returning champion, Patrick Flynn, Senior Vice President and the Global Head of Sustainability at Salesforce, and my new friend, Alexandria Villaseñor, who is the founder and Executive Director of Youth of Earth Uprising International. First of all, thank you so much for being here. Alexandria, let's start with you. Talk a little bit about, first of all, you've been an activist since you were 13. You're now 17. You started this organization. Talk a little bit about what you do and just a little bit about what brought you there.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for having me, and I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. And to answer that question, I got involved when I was 13, and before I got involved in climate activism, I actually didn't know much about climate in general. What happened is I've grown up in Northern California my entire life, but I moved to New York City in 2018, and I still went back and forth, though, quite a bit. So after a trip back home, in Northern California, I was here when the Camp Fire happened in Paradise, California. And at the time, that was California's worst wildfire in its history. And I ended up getting back to New York and researching and seeing how wildfires were being fueled by climate change. And that made me really want to do something, because I love my home, I love the people in it, the animals, the biodiversity in it. And so I ended up taking all of the emotions I was feeling, the climate anxiety and eco-grief, and I decided to join the Fridays for Future movement, and I started striking every single Friday in front of the United Nations headquarters in December of 2018, and I did that for over a year every single Friday.
Yeah. And I heard you speak at a Climate Week event in New York, and we established what year was that?
2019.
2019 at the top floor of Salesforce Tower and across from Bryant Park, and wow, I was like, I didn't know we were going to be doing this conversation. I didn't know you, but it was like, wow. I mean, this is amazing to hear how well-spoken you and I think some other young people were on this, and really opened my eyes to the fact that, you know, so much of the conversations that we adults and companies in particular have with young people, it's a little bit, I would say, you know, maybe a little condescending, or let's invite them in, or let's, you know, the cute kid act or something like that. You've been working with Salesforce for a few years. Talk a little bit about what you're doing and how that happened, and why Salesforce?
Yeah, of course. So I ended up meeting people from Salesforce when I first got involved in the climate movement. They're one of the first businesses that I started talking to, I remember. And I think that at the time it was really nice to have a conversation with a business in more of a how can we support you tone. And I think that that's been the tone from the very beginning, is how can we support the youth climate movement. And so I really appreciate that. And now I think it's really important for businesses to be taking action, because I've gone to the World Economic Forum. I've been to 2 of them before, and I've seen more action from businesses at the World Economic Forum than I have at COP or from governments. And so businesses are so important and key to getting the action that we need. And so with Salesforce specifically, Earth Uprising is using Salesforce technology. My organization, Earth Uprising, is using Salesforce technology for our back-end system. And I think it's really important to be doing that step, because there hasn't been another youth climate organization that's done that. And we've seen with how technology has supported the youth climate movement grow. And so I'm really excited to see how using this technology also helps us continue to organize and make much more of a difference too.
Yeah. So Patrick, bring you into the picture here. I mean, you know, as we said, you know, companies often engage with youth, the youth culture, in a sort of a tokenized way. And how is that? How do you approach it in a way where it doesn't feel that way?
Yeah, well, I think at Salesforce, we think so much about all of our stakeholders, everyone around us, sure, customers, shareholders, the planet is a key stakeholder, and the communities we live and work in, including the youth within them, is an important stakeholder to our process. We're also a company built on our values. We've got trust, customer success, innovation, equality, and this year sustainability added as our 5th value. Also, not in a tokenized way when we talk about our values. These are things that we look to everyone in the company to try to figure out, how do we get where we want to go? How do we think about our values as the navigational tool on our journey forward? And for me, leading sustainability, I work for planet Earth, and I know that business is the greatest platform for change, and in order to use it in service of a planet that doesn't know how to scream more loudly for help than everything we're seeing all around us, everywhere, we need to think about how it's first and foremost about equality. It's those with the least who suffer the most when climate change goes wrong, but there's also an intergenerational equality at play here, where, you know, as Paul Hawken would say, we're stealing from the future, selling it in the present, and calling it gross domestic product. We are pulling resources from the future, pulling a vibrant future from the next generation, and they see that, they feel that in a deep way that I don't. And so listening to them elevating their voices has always been a really helpful way to inform our strategy.
So how does what does this relationship do? I know that, you know, Salesforce has 1% of your product you donate, and there's those programs. But how does this help Salesforce, or is that not how you look at it? What does this relationship do at your end?
It's a couple of things. One is this idea of community. I know that's so central to this Verge experience here. There's a community effect, and in order to build an authentic community, learning from one another, learning from different perspectives, you need to have an inclusive approach and bring in the voices that might be overlooked. The second thing, to me, it's every time I hear Alexandria speak, it's like an injection of the need to be bold. They like I said, the younger generation looks at the year 2050 in a completely different way than I ever will. And all of us can fall victim to thinking a little bit too day to day. All of us, no matter how deeply we understand the urgency of this moment, it can be tempting to get through your inbox, can be tempting to just put one foot in front of the other in a given day, focus on incremental progress, and we cannot do that. We need every leader out there to aim big, aim for exponential change, and listening to the younger generation, to me, sort of charges that part of the battery that inspires me to try to swing big.
Yeah. Alexandria, let's talk a little bit about how you show up to a company, what you've learned about there, and what you like to see from a company in terms of how they show up with you. Mm-hmm. What have you learned, not just with Salesforce, but I'm sure that there have been others. It's not your first rodeo here.
Yeah, I think that one of the first things I noticed when starting to work with businesses and companies was there was very much so this politics of professionalism, where it felt like youth had to show up to the table and talk the same way they were. We had to communicate in the same way, and it kind of took away from what we were really pushing for. And I think that it's important for businesses and companies when working with youth to realize the differences in the ways that we organize. We're talking in ways of the bold action that we need, what we need to do for a planet, and sometimes businesses come in and they talk about, well, what they only think they can do. And so it's important to first understand that relationship, but then also the conversation when you engage with a young person, it doesn't just end after that. Thank you so much for what you're doing. You give me hope for the future. The conversation needs to continue after that, and constantly being engaging, especially around when we have global conferences that are coming up like COP and other spaces that are so influential like that. It's important to continue the conversation with youth.
Well, let's talk about that conversation. What is it about? What do you want it to be about? What does it need to be about?
Mm-hmm. I think that there's a couple different things. I think, first of all, youth bring a different perspective to the table. And the reason why is because when we get into these conversations with businesses, we think outside of the box that a lot of adults have been ingrained in. And they think inside the system, but youth come in and we think outside of it. And so some ways that youth have been engaged is, for example, companies have created youth councils. So the foundation side of IKEA, Inca, has created a youth council that I'm a part of as well. And one thing that we've done with them is we've had conversations with them about their supply chain, about their phase 1, 2, and 3. And so talking about more the way that they are working as a company and what they need to change. And I think that when you bring youth into the conversation, you need to get to that. You need to really get into it instead of just talking about the surface level, we're taking action.
Yeah. Patrick, what's the conversation you think other companies should be having? And what have you learned about in the conversations you've had with Alexandria and others?
I think every company should be thinking about the voices that they elevate and the platform that they can provide. So whether it's us at a Dreamforce conference or World Tour, or at a different event trying to make sure we have an inclusive environment, more voices, and bring the full community together. That's one thing everybody can do, because as much as your company might sell shoes or software or whatever, you also are a platform, a brand, and some place where you can elevate different voices. I think that's probably the biggest way that everybody can plug in and take action.
And are there particular topics? Because we keep talking about the conversation, and I said, well, still trying to get to this. What does it want to be about? What are the kinds of questions that each of you, might show up at that conversation with? Let's start with you, Alexandria.
Well, first of all, the main thing I look for in companies is what they're doing for scope 1, 2, and 3. I think that's really important to talk about, because I think that sometimes we just focus on the first and second scope, and we don't really go into the third scope. And I think that youth also, when we go into that conversation, we bring that idea of what they can be doing for Scope 3 instead. I also think that when it comes to elevating voices, ways that you can do that is create a spot for them in your rooms, but also funding them and giving them the spaces to go and be in more of those decision-making rooms as well.
Well, I mean, I just want to drill into this a little bit, and then I want to go to sidebar, make sure we get a question in a minute. So, Scope 1, 2, and 3, sure, we're doing our Scope 1, and we'll get to Scope 3, we'll plan by 2030 to have whatever. What do you do with that information? How does that change or affect what you then talk about?
Well, I think that it really just starts on finding out that information, because you'd be surprised how many companies don't even look at that information. And so I think it's important for companies to get that data. And also one thing, I started working with this company that started measuring the emissions of companies, and a lot of companies actually only check once a year how much they're emitting. And I think that that's also something that companies need to look towards, is how much are you emitting year round? Don't just check this data once a year. Check it constantly to see how you can change it.
Are you sure you're not a sales rep for their net zero cloud? So Patrick, what are some of the questions, the things that you like to bring to the table that you make sure that you can learn or ask?
Yeah, you know, when about a year ago, Salesforce put out our climate action plan, which in addition to having the rolled up data around Scope 1, 2, 3 and bold commitments and accelerating our journey to net zero now, 100% renewable now, we also turned it forwards and started being really clear about what we see the future road out to 2030 to look like, the places where we have the answers, the places where we're stuck. And I think there's a moment here where being transparent, even about the places where each of us is stuck around all of Scope 1, 2, 3 out to 2030, is a sort of a breakthrough that this community needs to become comfortable with. It's not shameful to be stuck in some places. It's a moment to share that and swarm and collaborate. And so in creating that climate action plan, we socialized it, and we went through this process of looking from the lens of 2030 backwards. So again, this idea that looking from the future, including looking from the eyes of somebody of the younger generation, forces you to be bold. We would ask ourselves the question, in 2030, what will the sustainable travel program, the sustainable cloud program, the sustainable supply chain program need to look like then to be in the lead? And what do we need to do now to set in motion the things that'll get us there?
Yeah.
And that experiment, it's exactly in line with this conversation of looking at things through the eyes of your future self, and in some ways even better than that is to look at it from the future, from the vantage point of somebody who's in the younger generation.
Yeah, great. Deanna, do you have a question for Patrick and Alexandria?
Yes, we do. Lee is actually going to ask.
Oh, Leah, okay. Hi, Leah.
Come on, Joel. So as a self-diagnosed, chronically cynical person, I hear conversations like these and I want to feel so uplifted and hopeful, but how can I know that a company is really listening to incredible people like Alexandria Villaseñor, who, by the way, I'm a really big fan.
Yeah. So Alexandria, how do you tell if a company's actually listening?
Well, first of all, I don't want you to listen to a conversation like this and feel hopeful and uplifted. I want you to go away with thinking about what we can constantly do more. And then I think that the way that I know a company is listening is that they continue engaging with us. I mean, I've been ghosted by companies. They'll say, we'll support you, and then they won't respond. So I think that the way that I see companies are listening is first they engage, but then they also actually show us what they're doing, because it's important that they don't just say words, they actually take action.
Yeah, you know, the relationship matters, right? Very Salesforce-y CRM company, but really the longevity, the consistency of the relationship, really listening to what you need help with and being there, making the connections. If we can provide it with technology or financially, great. If not, we've got a whole network of people who share our values and making sure that we can put you in the right hands.
We've got just a minute left, and I want to ask you, give the last question to you, Alexandria. I hear people talk a lot about allyship. What does that mean to you, and what does that look like in the context of these kinds of conversations?
I think that allyship, the way that I've always looked to it is people who are a fan of the youth climate movement, and what I mean by that is anyone can be a fan of it, and that is fund, amplify, and narrate. So first of all, within the climate movement, there's a lot of youth who are being impacted by the climate crisis, but their voices aren't the ones being amplified. It's only the people who can travel and go to those places that we hear from. So fund youth, get them to the places, get their voices heard, amplify our voices, and then also narrate. Everybody's own climate story is so important, how everyone is being impacted, why it's important that we're taking action. I want you all to share your own stories and why it's important that companies should be taking action.
Yeah, wow. Well, Patrick, I love what you're saying about we need to judge ourselves from the future. I think that's something that I hadn't thought about till I heard you say that the other day, and I think that's something we all need to be thinking more about, is how do we judge what we're doing from 2030 or whatever, pick your date. And Alexandria, you are the future, and we need you to hold Patrick, all of us to account for that future that you will hopefully thrive and abundant and then be able to enjoy as we have ours. So thank you so much for being here. Please join me in thanking Alexandria and Patrick.
Thank you all so much for that conversation. Huge fan. Yes. All right, well, with that, we are going to send you all out for snacks and beverages for our break. We will transition into our first set of breakouts. Join us this evening for the opening reception in the beautiful expo hosted by Amazon's Climate Pledge. And do not miss, after that, later this evening, our first inaugural Climate Tech Cocktails Trivia Night at Camino Brewing down the street. With that, welcome again to Verge 22.
All right, that is a wrap for day one of the keynote session. Leah?
That was incredible. My first keynote session, definitely not my last. So far my favorite, but I'm willing to let the list grow.
Yeah, for sure. We have a lot more to come tomorrow and also on Thursday. Something I'm really looking forward to is Dawn Wright's conversation with Aulani Wilhelm and Kakani Katahi, who is the principal engineer at Monterey Bay Aquarium. So I'm looking forward to that. What about you?
Me, personally, I'm a writer and I'm a reader, and I'm so excited about Kim Stanley Robinson, who is just one of my favorite authors of all time. He will be here, and he will be speaking with Molly Wood about, science fiction and how it's so often colliding with climate change and climate tech. Some other people that I'm excited about, Jennifer Granholm is going to be zooming in to speak about what the Biden-Harris climate agenda means for clean energy and communities. Any more that you're excited about?
Yes, you said communities. I think frontline communities are definitely important to center in all of the conversations that we're having, and Charisma AC is going to be giving a talk about that tomorrow. I think that should be a through line at all of these types of conferences.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so, continue to tune in with us over the next couple of days. We will be here, as I mentioned earlier. Leah will not be joining me tomorrow.
I'll be crying off screen. It's whatever.
So tomorrow I'll be joined by John Schmea, who is the VP of Circularity at GreenBiz. And then the next day I will be with Sarah Golden, who is the VP of Energy, I believe, at GreenBiz. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining me at Sidebar.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for putting up with me, virtual watchers. It's been so fun.
Yes. All right. See y'all tomorrow.